Are we about to see a strategy shift at Arsenal following the arrival of Andrea Berta? We'll get into some of the plans we thought we had and how different they look just a couple of weeks after the Italian has taken charge. We're also going to start building up to that huge game in Madrid on Wednesday night. We've got lots to get through, as always, on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's get into it. Hey, everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, coming to you live on YouTube at 10 a.m. Yes, what is that? 4-5 days now? We've managed that in a row. I know I keep bleating on about it, but hey, for me, that's an achievement. Good to see so many of you with us nice and early. I don't know if you're anything like me, but I mean, I can't get my mind off Madrid. I can't get my mind off the Bernabeu. I can't think about anything else. I can't find ways to distract myself from this huge, huge game and what it means. And it's a strange one, right? We'll get into it in a little bit more detail, but it's one of those where we're obviously the favorites to progress because of the advantage and the lead that we have. But the closer it gets to the big night, the more nervous I feel and the more concerned I feel about what awaits us in Madrid. And then I start reading stories like, they're putting on emotional videos for the players when they arrive at the Bernabeu, the Real Madrid fans, that is, in order to try and galvanize them into producing a miracle. We hear that the roof's going to be closed at the Santiago Bernabéu to make the atmosphere even better. It's messing with my head. I got to be honest with you. And last night, right? So I'm not a golf fan at all, for the record. Okay. I don't particularly like golf. I've never been able to get into it. I feel like it's one of those things I'd probably enjoy more if I played it than when I watch it. But over the course of the weekend, like lots of friends of mine were glued to the Masters, right? So much so that we tried to make some plans on Friday night. And one of the boys said, I'm not coming. And we said, why? Is everything okay? And he said, well, the guy whose place that we're meeting up at, he doesn't have Sky Sports. So I can't watch the Masters. Therefore, I'm not coming. And I remember at that time thinking, we've all made the effort, right? We've all taken the time out of our busy schedules to try and meet up. And this guy's not going to come because he wants to watch the bloody golf. But last night, I went to bed at about 11 o'clock, 11:30. I was knackered, shattered. And when I got into bed, I had a quick scroll through X and I saw everybody sort of commenting about Rory McIlroy and the Masters and how amazing it was and how on a knife edge it was. And so I put it on in my bedroom and I was hooked. I was glued to the ending. I saw the final hole and then I saw the playoff bit as well. And it was fantastic. I can understand why people were so on board with it. I do feel it's one of those things that the build-up's probably quite boring, but the climax was quite good, I suppose. So yeah, anyway, I don't know why I got onto golf, but I guess the point was I went to bed and because I couldn't sleep, partly because I was thinking about Madrid, I started scrolling through social media and that led to me watching the end of the Masters. So basically, this tie with Real Madrid is wreaking havoc on my mind, my sleeping patterns, and all the rest of it. So yeah, we'll get into that game in a little bit. I do want to mainly focus on Andrea Berta today because we're going to have a much more in-depth preview podcast, which will be with you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. I say bright and early, 10 a.m. because that's our time. We'll be with you at 10 a.m. tomorrow and we'll be building up to Madrid. And I'll be bringing you that podcast just hours before I board the plane to head over to the Spanish capital. I said to someone not that long ago that there were two stadiums that I really needed to do. And we've been really, really lucky as Arsenal fans that we've got to do them both this season. Obviously, the first one for me was San Siro. As a huge Italian football fan, I've always had a thing for San Siro. It's never worked out that I've got to go there to watch a game. And of course, Arsenal faced them, didn't they, earlier this season in the Champions League. So I got to make that trip. And now it's the Bernabeu. I've done the Camp Nou, but the Bernabeu is the one for me that, once we got drawn against them, I couldn't miss it for the world. So I'm buzzing. Can't wait to get out there. Really, really excited. And fingers crossed we get the result that we want. Let's talk Andrea Berta, though, because I think what we've seen in the first sort of really short period in which he's been in charge is that everything we thought we knew about transfer plans could quite easily go out of the window between now and the summer when you'd expect that execution. Let's get into it right after this. So it was just a few days ago that Edu officially announced his departure. Now, the club had already announced it, but Edu put a lovely message out and obviously said thank you to the Arsenal fans and the Arsenal hierarchy, everybody essentially that was involved in his tenure prior to Andrea Berta's arrival. He was the club's first ever sporting director. And what I won't put up with, I mean, I say I won't put up with it. I'm not going to do anything if you do it, but I don't like the Edu slander because I think that this is a guy who did a lot for Arsenal Football Club in that period of time. I think that the transformation of the football club, and I know there'll always be those naysayers out there that will go, what transformation? We still haven't won anything, blah, 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 blah. Well, the fact that I've just spent the first 5 minutes of this podcast talking about how a tie against Real Madrid is kind of wreaking havoc on me already, even though we're 3-0 up, is messing with my sleep patterns. That's exactly the kind of buzz, excitement, feel, and anticipation that we've been missing around Arsenal Football Club for years and years and years. We hadn't been in the Champions League for a long, long time, let alone made the quarterfinals, which we've done in consecutive seasons now. And we stand a very, very good chance of making the semi-final. Okay, we're going to finish second again in the Premier League. It's not ideal. It's not what we wanted. It's not what we set out to achieve at the start of the season. But I do think there are a number of circumstances that have contributed to that in the end being our reality. But the fact that we're here, the fact that we expect Arsenal to win the league, the fact that we expect Arsenal to make the last four of the Champions League now, that is in part because of the transformation that was overseen by other people at the club too, but Edu as well as anybody else. And so when people say he didn't do a good job, he's this, he's that, it really frustrates me. Really, really frustrates me. Has Andrea Berta got a better track record as a sporting director than Edu? Absolutely. Can you make the case and the argument that Andrea Berta is an upgrade on Edu? Absolutely, you can. And that's why I'm so chuffed that the club went out when tasked with replacing Edu and got the best in class. They didn't cheap out. They didn't go and get someone that is on the pathway, someone that is learning. They went and got someone that's been there and done it, which shows you that we know as a football club, we've got to deliver now, right? We've done so much work, so much graft to get to where we are now. And that needs to culminate into something. It needs to develop into something. It needs to bring success. So they've gone and got a guy who's very, very savvy in the transfer market, who has worked very, very closely with similar types of characters in terms of managers. I know that people won't make that comparison between Simeone and Arteta because one's been vastly successful, one hasn't yet. But I honestly do believe that Mikel Arteta will go on to have a very successful managerial career. Where the similarity comes is that he's quite combustible, Mikel Arteta. Very, very passionate. Sometimes you would argue it's a little bit too much. And sometimes you would argue that if he kept his emotions in check, things might turn out a little bit differently. It's the rough with the smooth, right? You got to take that. But the fact that Andrea Berta has been successful working alongside a character like that gives me confidence that he can handle what Mikel Arteta is going to bring. He can handle that type of character, that type of person. And so, whilst, yes, we can wax lyrical about Andrea Berta, we can be buzzing with his appointment, this idea that Edu done a crap job, it's a stupid idea. Get it out of your heads because it's not true whatsoever. Not true at all. Let's get some of your comments and thoughts on this, and then we'll come on to talk about some of the transfer plans and how I believe they've shifted a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Junior Howe says, hit the like and subscribe button on your way in, people. Yes, please do. If you are a regular viewer or listener, you'll know exactly what type of content you're going to get. And there's lots more to come from Madrid over the next couple of days as well, which I'm buzzing about. So yeah, like, subscribe, all the rest of it. What else have we got? We got Man Like Som from Essex. Good to see you, mate. Dr. Pepper's joining us. 5 p.m. in my city. Good to join, Harry. Excited for Madrid. Mr. Miyagi says, not even we can bottle this lead. Hey, I'm not saying anything. We're playing Real Madrid. On the volley says, I think something happened behind the scenes between Arteta and Edu. Look, we're never really and truly going to know, okay, what exactly transpired. But I don't think there's any real ill feeling. I just think that Edu was very, very clear on what he wanted for his own career in terms of his ambition. He wanted to be a CEO. And Arsenal were not willing to put him into that position. Arsenal did, as far as I understand, make a counter offer to try and keep a hold of Edu, but his mind was made up. He was joining Marinakis' group. He's getting a hell of a lot of money to go there, and he gets to do a role that better matches his ambitions. Now, I find that a little bit strange, personally. Like, I needed a lot of time to kind of get my head around that, and I probably still haven't really and truly got my head around that, because for me, being the sporting director of Arsenal Football Club is a bigger and more prestigious role than being the CEO of a group of clubs, none of which, even if you added them all together, stack up to the size of Arsenal Football Club. Now, financially, obviously, there's an incentive there. That's partly, I believe, why Edu's gone. And listen, sometimes you need to jump around a bit. Anybody that's worked in a corporate environment will know that. You know, I worked in banking for 10 years, 11 years, maybe even 12 years. I've lost count. And I realized pretty early on that if you don't jump around from one company to another, you're going to struggle to kind of constantly take steps forward in terms of your salary, your title, your role, etc., etc. It's important. It's important. Let me go back to some of the comments. Look, I don't think anything happened. I think Mikel Arteta can be quite overbearing. I think Mikel Arteta knows what he wants, and he's going to push and he's going to fight to get that. And in a lot of ways, the sporting director's job is to obviously have input and to have influence. But at the same time, sometimes the sporting director's job is to step back and go, you're the coach, you're the manager, you know better in the footballing sense. My job now is not to be a blocker for you or to be an obstacle on your path to where you want to be, but instead it's to facilitate what you want, to give you what you need. And a lot of the time, if you give a coach and a manager what they want, because normally they're the most football savvy people at the football club, then they will get there in the end. And so I think there was a good balance between Edu and Arteta. There was Edu, who's an invincible, got that incredible status among the Arsenal faithful, knows what it takes to be successful at this specific football club. And then you've got this manager who's really driven, really young still, really ambitious, maybe sometimes needed sort of put him back in his lane. And Edu had that authority because of his previous and his history to be able to do that. But at the same time, he was never a blocker for Mikel Arteta. I don't think we ever got to the point where he was a blocker, and I don't think that's why he left. But I do think that sometimes things just need freshening up. And if Arteta's role was growing in terms of influence, which I think it probably has, then, you know, maybe Edu felt like there wasn't space for both of them anymore. But I don't think they've fallen out. Not for a second. I don't. Okay. This is the look. He didn't do a good job. 750 million spent, and the squad is not good enough. Look how much Man City have spent over the last few years. You know, to get to that run of success that they had, they spent way more than 750 million. Also, the other thing is that we weren't able to offset that money against sales because we'd done so much bad business prior that nobody wanted to pick up our dud players, right? So that's another thing. He also says 750 spent, no attacking talent for subs is about. Come on. He also says Havertz on 280k. Bad job. Edu ain't a hustler. Kai Havertz has been a really good signing for Arsenal. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're talking nonsense. Dr. Pepper says Edu is an invincible and one of us that is growing in his personal career. Best of luck to him and excited to have Berta. Rob says whatever job Edu did, as in many industries, people leave, and like players, people get upgraded. Wesbird says, I think that Edu thought he'd get more responsibility, but that didn't happen. So maybe he didn't feel as valued as he wanted, and then he got the huge opportunity. Let's be clear as well, right? The Marinakis thing, the interest in Edu was long-standing. It wasn't like Edu woke up one morning and decided I'm going there, right? There was a long-standing interest. Evangelos Marinakis, he knows what he wants. And when he wants it, he goes after it. And he was going after Edu for a long, long time. We heard of rumors linking him coming out of Greece long before that deal was ever done or ever even close as far as we understand it. D says, Edu did a great job transforming this squad. Was such a tough job. Saw a compilation of the 2020 team. Terrible bunch. That's it. Raz says, where would we be without Edu? I don't like the way he left, but I don't think we can dispute what he brought to the club. That's it. David says, happy to get to join live from New York, doing early hour duty with my newborn daughter, future Gooner. Keep them coming. Thank you. All the best, mate. And I've been there, man. I'm going to be there again soon, dealing with newborn babies and early shifts. I mean, I'll be honest with you, mate. I want to make you feel better, but it doesn't get any easier. Like mine now are 3 and 6, and they still get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and literally bring the house down until everybody else gets out of bed. Right, look, let's move on from the Edu stuff, because I do want to focus on Andrea Berta and why and how I think our plans have taken a bit of a shift over the course of the last few weeks. We'll get to that right after this very short pause.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
You heard the kid. Like and subscribe. You're watching the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, or listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, depending on which platform you're taking us in from, with me, Harry Symeou. Remember, we come to you live every day, 10 a.m. That's our new set time. We'll also bring you bonus pieces and additional pieces at different times, just depending on maybe when news breaks and stuff like that. But this is going to be our regular slot moving forward. And also remember, if you want to and you want to support the pod, you can do that by going over to patreon.com/the Chronicles of a Gooner. The link is in the description below. I've been blown away by how many new members we've had sign up over the last few days. We're going to bring you player ratings attached to all the main pods. So when we do a main pod looking back on a game, there'll be a 15 or so minute segment that drops shortly afterwards, in which we do player ratings, and that'll be after every single game. And if we do some other cool stuff, which I'm trying to get lined up at the moment, I won't say too much right now, then you'll get early access to that by being a patron. More than anything, though, it just supports me in terms of bringing you this podcast on a daily basis. And for that, I'm very, very grateful and appreciative. Okay, so Andrea Berta is in. He's taken on his role. And all of a sudden, we've seen things just shift a little bit. Now, you might be thinking, what's he talking about? You know, it's still April. Nothing's been done. It's all rumors at this stage. And obviously, we've had international breaks. And when you have international breaks, the transfer rumors, they become more and more rife, don't they? Because ultimately, you feel like people are looking for stuff to talk about. So I'm not saying that anything that we're going to touch on today or cover today is necessarily a done deal, but it's just interesting to me that, you know, going into sort of the final stretch of this season, there was a lot of talk about certain players. Like, for instance, there was loads of talk about Alexander Isak. And we'd all love to have him. We all know that he's one of the best strikers around at the moment. He's had a wonderful season, a successful season with Newcastle United. How many former Newcastle strikers can say that? Not even the great Alan Shearer can say that. And so, listen, he's really kind of a valuable real estate in football in terms at the moment, right? And a lot of people want him. But it feels to me like that talk has died down a little bit, partly because Newcastle have been successful in the Carabao Cup. They're also on course, in my opinion, to qualify for the Champions League. And if they manage that, it becomes a lot easier to keep hold of Alexander Isak from 2 points of view. Firstly, he wants success. He wants to be playing in Europe's premier competition. You've dished up success with the Carabao Cup, and obviously he played a massive part in that. And you're going to have Champions League football, which will appease him, at least for now. So their relative success this season, it does help their cause in terms of keeping him. Then you factor in the price tag, which is going to be extortionate. I'd imagine it's going to take over 120, 130 million pounds to get Alexander Isak out of Newcastle United, especially if they get that Champions League revenue and there's not that huge need to bring in money for PSR reasons. So the price tag is mad. And for a long time, it's kind of been, well, Arteta really wants him. Arteta's looking at him. Arteta thinks he's the number one target, blah, blah, blah. Arsenal are going to try their luck. And very quickly after Andrea Berta come in, it was as if the Alexander Isak talk just went cold. It was as if Andrea Berta came in and went, stop messing around, believing you're going to sign this guy when there is very, very little chance of us getting that over the line. Let's turn our attention elsewhere. Now, we seemingly have turned our attention towards Viktor Gyokeres. Now, I'm not saying that Gyokeres wasn't on Arsenal fans' radars prior to Andrea Berta's arrival, but there he was at Sporting Lisbon with a release clause. And listen, in my opinion, the release clause was too high, and I was never going to back the idea of spending 100 million euros on Viktor Gyokeres. But from what we understand, Andrea Berta has been looking at him for a while, was looking at him for Atletico Madrid. He's come here and he's gone, that, my friends, is a much more viable option. That is an option that we can seriously explore. And, I already have a relationship with the player. I already have a relationship with the player's representatives. I think I can get them to kind of force a much lower sale price. And I'm going to use my vast network of contacts within the European game to put the feelers out and figure out whether this is a more viable deal. Now, again, I'm not saying that we're definitely going to do this, but it did feel like the Gyokeres ship had sailed prior to Berta's arrival. And, it's about the cost versus the reward in a lot of these instances, because I think if you did a poll, take Alexander Isak out of it. If you put a poll out there to Arsenal fans and you said, who do you want, Gyokeres or Sesko? I think the opinion would be quite divided. One thing I will say in Gyokeres' favor is that for me, he's more proven than Benjamin Sesko. He's less of a risk than Benjamin Sesko. And my thing with Gyokeres was always, don't spend 100 million euros on him. That is crazy because we've got other bits of business to be doing and needing to be doing. And so when the price came down, as it seemingly has, and quite significantly, all of a sudden, that become a much more attractive proposition. And that's just one example of the shift in plans when you have a different sporting director. Mikel Arteta, I'm sure, will have a say and will have an influence in who ends up coming in as our number 9. But it does feel to me like Andrea Berta has come in and looked at things a little bit more realistically. And he's maybe put Arsenal off of Benjamin Sesko a little bit. I'm speculating here, but think about Benjamin Sesko as an option, okay? Young, yes, a good prospect. Look at the underlying stats. We did a pod on this a little while ago. If you look at the underlying stats and the underlying metrics, my concern with Benjamin Sesko has always been that he's not as involved in the all-round game as I'd like Arsenal's number 9 to be, and as much as I'd believe Mikel Arteta wants his number 9 to be. So that was a red flag for me. Does he score a crazy amount of goals? Not really. He scores goals, but is it so many goals? Like, is it like Erling Haaland, where he scores so many damn goals that you don't mind if he's a little bit anonymous in other sort of, phases of the game, because he's going to bring you that reward with the number of goals that he scores over the course of a season. Sesko doesn't fall into that bracket. Sesko's a project signing. Gyokeres is a now signing. And it feels to me like Andrea Berta, it feels to me like the biggest shift since he's come in is now. You brought me in to win now. It's different to when we appointed Edu, who came in with the view to a 5-6 year project where we needed to overhaul the squad, where we needed to rebuild pretty much everything from the ground upwards. This is a very different appointment. This is an appointment for the here, for the now. And I think Andrea Berta has brought a different perspective to the club now when it comes to the summer transfer business. Everybody's talking about centre forwards, right? And that's the position that for the longest time as Arsenal fans, it feels like we've been calling for the club to go out and address. But there are other bits of business that we are required to do in the summer. We're going to, as far as we know right now, at the time of recording, on the 14th of April, 2025, we're going to lose Thomas Partey. We're going to lose Jorginho. These guys need replacing. And so you need to do work in other areas of the pitch as well. And therefore, can you really afford to go and spend 65, 70 million quid on another project signing? No, you got to sign players for the here and now. The higher the age in terms of their profile, and Gyokeres is obviously older than Benjamin Sesko, the higher the fee is going to be. Obviously, sometimes you can see it work the other way, where potential can outweigh the reality. And we've seen players of young ages go for way too much money, in my opinion, based on potential. But again, it's about the here, it's about the now, it's about today. It's not necessarily about tomorrow anymore. And that's the big seismic shift I see. The change in sort of priority in terms of the striking targets, that comes, in my opinion, from Andrea Berta. It doesn't necessarily mean that because we spent months, maybe even years in some cases, tracking certain players prior to the Italians' arrival, that we're still going to go down that route and pursue them. We read yesterday that Joan Garcia, the Espanyol goalkeeper that we've been linked with for ages, is now no longer as much of a priority as he would have been a little while back. We read that his people have had zero contact from Arsenal since Andrea Berta come in. Now, if he's come in and he's got his head down straight away, the new sporting director, and he's trying to put deals in place for the summer, surely there would have been some contact there. Now, again, I'm not sitting here saying that we don't sign any of these players and that those deals are all dead in the water, because I don't know that, right? I'm speculating here to a degree. But it does feel to me like Arsenal might explore some slightly different avenues as a result of this appointment, and rightly so. If you're just going to stick to the previous plan, then do you even need a sporting director to execute things that are already in motion? Probably not. You could have just let Jason Ato do it. There was an acknowledgement, there was an understanding that in bringing this guy in, we were going and getting the best in class, and therefore we have to let him do his bit and have his say. And so, the Joan Garcia thing, I think, is really interesting. There was a piece from Ryan Taylor yesterday. He said, Andrea Berta's influence on Arsenal's summer transfer business cannot be understated. For instance, Joan Garcia, long viewed within the club as the ideal number 2 to David Raya, is one deal Berta seems keen to reconsider. Arsenal have done plenty of groundwork on Garcia, a player initially recommended by goalkeeping coach Inaki Kanya. However, sources close to the player have indicated that there has been no contact from Berta since he started work at Arsenal. Up to 10 clubs have approached Garcia's representatives, and he will be allowed to leave Espanyol for below his release clause this summer, but he's still likely to cost a decent fee. Garcia remains open to joining Arsenal and would be keen to compete with Raya for the number 1 spot at the club should the opportunity arise. So there you go. You're getting reports now. You're getting reports coming out just suggesting that Andrea Berta has just slightly shifted the focus on some of our potential transfer targets. And that is very, very interesting to me. Martin Zubimendi is another one, right? We've heard loads about him. And, we keep hearing that the deal is, quite far down the line and that it's a case of sort of dotting the I's and crossing the T's ahead of the summer. Are we going to see a shift there? Maybe we will. That's the thing. We just don't know. And that, in a way, is kind of exciting, isn't it? Like, because one thing I've said over the last few summers is that it's felt like we've ended up hearing names and then watching us sort of pursue them for sometimes 2-3 months, talking about them over and over again. And then by the time the signing actually arrives and they're here, we go, oh, well, that's done then. Cheers. Like, how long did we hear about Declan Rice before the deal got done? How long did we hear about Kai Havertz before we heard of the announcement? Okay, granted, that one came out of the blue a little bit, but we tend to hear of these things and then they drag on for ages and ages and ages. And, if we ended up signing Zubimendi, I know there'll be a lot of Arsenal fans out there that will be delighted with that, but there'll be a lot of us also that look at it and go, okay, well, that's a bit of an anticlimax because we kind of knew that was coming. So, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how plans can change, plans can shift. And I really do believe that Andrea Berta is not here to make up the numbers. He looks very stern, very serious. I think he is. He's ready to make an impact. And whether that impact is going to be what's required and help us get over the line, only time will tell, right? It's football. There's no guarantees. We'll see. But yeah, I do think that he's probably gone in there and I think he's ruffled a few feathers and I think he's maybe just put a few plans out of joint as well. Plans that were already in the pipeline, plans that maybe some of the other people behind the scenes were preparing to execute. And I think he's cast doubt over some of their plans. And listen, some of those players, Zubimendi, for instance, that might still be the right signing. That might still be the right solution. It might be a case of, them coming in, or Andrea Berta coming in, I should say, and not dismissing it, but just giving people some food for thought. If I question you on this, if I push you on this and you still think he's the right answer, then he probably is the right answer. You know, sometimes you need to be challenged to kind of really be sure on something. And I think that's healthy within a football club. I think we really do need it. Right, we're going to take a really, really brief pause. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the Real Madrid game coming up on Wednesday night. I'll also take some of your questions and thoughts from the live chat. There's loads and loads still to get into on this episode of the podcast. So please don't go anywhere. Seeing as we're building up to Madrid, should we have a listen back to the goals from the first leg? That should get your juices flowing. And I just don't want to play the same ad breaker that I did earlier on. So let's do that. And we'll be back in just a mo with more.
Declan Rice to hit it. Declan Rice scores! Stunning from Declan Rice! It's going to be Rice. And he's done it again! Oh my word! Declan Rice has been one into the top corner and doubled Arsenal's lead! Into Mikel Merino! Arsenal are a third! Arsenal are in dreamland! And it's a Spaniard, Mikel Merino, who finds the bottom corner! Arsenal 3, Real Madrid 0! You wouldn't believe it!
Oh, what a night that was. But we got to follow it up on Wednesday. We got to go out there and do the job. It is so important that we get over the line. Guys, just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, before we continue through the stream, I can see there's nearly 500 of you with us live on YouTube right now, which is amazing. Please do leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. That really does help. If you haven't done so already and you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review as well. That's really important and really does help. I'm just going to check in on the likes. Where are we at in terms of likes right now? We've only got 86 likes on the ball. Come on, there's no reason why we shouldn't have a couple of hundred, given how many of you are with us live right now. Okay, let's dive into the comment section, and we'll naturally kind of segue over to the Real Madrid game in a minute. Ola says you had to play the commentary. That's the last time, I promise you. That's the last time, I promise you. Tom says headphones warning, Harry be screaming. David says there's over 400 plus viewers, only 80 likes. This is as underwhelming as Manchester United's goalkeepers. Rob says back down to earth now. Wednesday is our biggest game for many years. Completely agree. Okay, there was a few questions that came in that I want to tackle. I love it when you guys send loads of questions because it makes doing a one-man podcast actually possible. Tom says, wouldn't Berta also know from his Atletico contacts that they're looking at Garcia as a long-term Oblak replacement and would be happy to send him back on a season-long loan to his current club? That's a really good point and a really kind of interesting facet to this, right? Because I think we talked about it on one of our episodes maybe a few weeks ago when that report came out, the report that said that obviously Atletico Madrid were looking at Joan Garcia as that Oblak replacement. Maybe Andrea Berta knows that that is too far down the line. Maybe he knows that because of David Raya's position at the club, there's no way that Joan Garcia is going to get the guarantees that he would get from Atletico Madrid. And they're a huge club, Atleti. They're massive. You know, they've really come on a long way under Diego Simeone's stewardship. They've always been a big club, and you know, I've always admired them sort of growing up and looked at them with great fondness. But I think Diego Simeone's taken that club to a whole new level, and to be the number one, the long-term number one at Atleti is a real attractive prospect, I'd imagine, for a young Spanish goalkeeper growing up, and probably more attractive than being second fiddle to David Raya. And listen, Mikel Arteta, he's not that guy, right? We thought he might be that guy when he brought Raya in and still had Ramsdale at the club, where he played one in the Cups and one in the... And he didn't do it. So there's no previous. There's no history to go by that suggests that Joan Garcia would get lots of opportunities at Arsenal as the number two. So he might talk a good game and he might say, look, I believe in myself and I believe that I can take on that spot and, you know, I could really challenge David Raya. But if you're knocking at the door and the manager's not opening it, then that will only take you so far, right? That desire and that want to push forward. So maybe that's something to do with it. That's a really good point from Tom. Perhaps Andrea Berta is aware of that Atleti interest, is aware of conversations that have taken place between the goalkeeper and his former employers, and maybe feels like we're going to end up going into a bit of a battle that we're probably not going to win. And the sort of damage that we do by going into that battle is unnecessary. So let's just keep it back and not bother going into that particular fight. Some really anti-Edu comments coming up in the chat. I'm not going to read that one out because I'm not going to read that kind of language on the pod. I know from time to time I drop the odd F-bomb by accident. I say by accident. I should do better at controlling that, but you get where I'm going with it. Paul James says, the proof in the pudding will be if Berta's signings push Arsenal over the line. Anything less, and he's a failure. Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but I think when you're judging success versus failure in football, I don't think it's as black and white as people would like to think it is. So often you get people going, win a trophy, success, don't win a trophy, failure. I'm not sure it's always that black and white. And I can give you a real, I think, important and good example of this in recent years. Erik ten Hag won 2 trophies at Manchester United in back-to-back seasons. Would you say that Erik ten Hag was a success at Manchester United? Because I think part of the reason they are where they are today is because of how badly they were managed by Erik ten Hag. Now, there are other issues at that football club that have obviously contributed to that. But Erik ten Hag was not a good appointment for Manchester United. And a Carabao Cup and an FA Cup, I'm sorry, does not mask over the fact that he was terrible for a long, long time, and he took the club backwards. And that in itself, I think, brings down the theory of if you win trophies, you're successful, and if you don't, you're just a failure. I think there's so much more analysis and so much more nuance to that kind of question and that kind of debate. Now, I'm not saying that if you don't win anything, you're still successful as long as the vibes are good. That's not what I'm saying. I just think I think there's a much bigger criteria by which you would judge that. And I don't think you can make that judgment based purely on wins a cup or doesn't win a cup. Sniper says, Harry, can we speak on the Salah and Virgil van Dijk contracts? Does that not deflate your feelings about our chances of winning the league next season? No, it doesn't, because I honestly think that if we had our house in order, and I know that, we couldn't deal with the injury problems that we had, and it was an unprecedented amount of injury problems. So when I say this, I'm not saying this from, it was all our fault, we messed it up, blah, blah, blah. I think we could have done more. I do. I've said that over and over again. I felt like the January window was an opportunity to try and restrict some damage. I guess no, not really, because they're coming into a certain stage in their careers, those two players. Okay, they're not showing obvious signs of letting up, but they will let up at some point. The level will drop at some point. And even with them both fit and firing, if we were at our level, I still think we would have won the league, or at least pushed them for it. That's my biggest disappointment and frustration. And we talked about it on yesterday's pod. It's just that feeling of we let it kind of just crawl away from us. It didn't sprint away from us. It crawled away from us over the course of a few months. And that was really, really difficult. Difficult to take. But no, I'm not. I'm focused on what we're doing. I'm not too fussed about Liverpool. Here we go. I knew someone was going to take this out of context. Andrew J54 says, what the F, Harry? So trophies don't mean anything. I didn't say that. I said trophies are part of how you judge success. Maybe I didn't make that clear enough. I believe trophies are part of what you judge success versus failure on, but it's not the sole metric. Okay, so I think Edu was a success at Arsenal because when he came in, Arsenal were on their knees, and now they're in a position where people like you and me and others are expecting them to go into campaigns and win the game's biggest honors and biggest trophies. So for me, Edu is a success, but people will look at it and go, well, there's only one FA Cup. And if there's only one FA Cup during that period of time, then it can't be success. In fact, it's failure. And I think the truth is often somewhere in between. I think this kind of, black and white success versus failure, this binary version of it, it doesn't make sense. It's not how you judge I don't think fairly. I think to judge fairly, you got to look at a load of things. So let's say in Edu's case, because we were talking about Edu earlier on, right? So if I was to write up a list of things that I'll be judging Edu on, I've got a piece of paper in front of me now. What would I be judging him on? I'll be judging him on the culture shift, which I think he played a big part in, along with Mikel Arteta, which I think in turn helped us on the pitch. So that's one thing. Transfer business. Then you can divide transfer business into two things, right? Sales versus buys. But then when it gets to sales, you got to think about the sales that were difficult because of bad business in the past. So big players on big contracts that weren't doing the business for Arsenal anymore. Edu didn't put them on those contracts. So you're going to mark him down on the failure to sell them for good money in our eyes. But was that even possible or achievable? Do you get what I mean? So everything that you analyze, it can be broken down into lots and lots of subcategories. And that's why I think when you're analyzing this stuff, you got to really break it down and really go into the kind of the sort of the nooks and crannies of it to understand whether someone was successful or not. Salaries, over the beginning period, Arsenal did a lot of work in bringing down the wage bill. Again, Edu oversaw that. That then enabled them to go out and sign some of the players that they did on the salaries that they did, but they also left themselves headroom so that, for instance, in a circumstance like now, where you've got Bukayo Saka, who's, needing to sign a new contract in the not too distant future. And it was reported yesterday by Nicolo Schira in Italy that Bukayo Saka is getting closer to extending his contract with Arsenal until 2030. The salary management is important in something like that because you need to have the headroom to be able to bump up his salary without that causing you an issue financially. So there's so many factors. I'm not going to go through all the factors because we'd be here all day. But the point I'm trying to make here, guys, is that to judge someone's success or failure at a football club, you've got to go through so many different things to get to a fair and sort of in-depth conclusion. And so this guy, if Berta doesn't win, if Berta's signings this summer don't see us win the league next season, then we're done. And he's a failure. It can't be that black and white. Rachel says 100K per week for Tomiyasu, bargain. Look, again, there will be mistakes along the way. And I think that when it comes to Takahiro Tomiyasu, I think we made a mistake doing what we did, bumping up his contract. But again, it's a consequence of the environment that you build. If Tomiyasu is a first team defender, someone who's a part of the squad when he's available, and I know that hasn't been very often, and he's on 40 grand a week or something ridiculously off tilt versus everybody else, then you have an environment that you need to try and maintain in order to keep that squad harmony. Again, I'm not saying that was the right decision. I think it was the wrong decision. Rachel Williams, again, look, 150K per week for Jorginho to play 4 games a season. He doesn't play 4 games a season. That's a classic case of someone just trying to bend the truth to sort their argument. How many appearances has he made this season? It's more than 4. And also, it's the off the pitch impact that someone like Jorginho has as well, that again, we ain't in a position to judge. So listen, I'm not saying that you can't say someone's a failure or someone's a success. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions and you can have your opinion, no problem. But this idea that it's binary, win the Carabao Cup or don't, one is success and one is failure is mad. It's mad. And Chan, you couldn't have put this better, mate. Some proper crybabies in here that love a rant without context. Absolutely. The problem with this kind of conversation is, and the problem with these kinds of debates is that very often, people go through the information that they have in front of them and available to them, and they pick the bits that suit their argument, but they're never going to open their minds up to the wider debate and wider conversation. You see what I mean? Like, for example, the Tomiyasu thing. Again, my opinion on it, just to be clear, is that we shouldn't have bumped up his contract because these injury problems have been ongoing for ages, and we're not getting the bang for our buck when it comes to Takahiro Tomiyasu, right? But the bit that you don't mention is that actually versus some of his teammates, Takahiro Tomiyasu was vastly underpaid prior to that bump up. Now, again, I'm not saying it was right to do what we did to bump it up, but the context is that he was way below what everybody else in that kind of area of the team and whose roles reflected similar ones to his. He was way below them, and that's why it had to be done. Again, look, this is the last one I'm going to do, right? Because I know that other people in the chat are getting fed up with this stuff. 100K to Eddie and Nelson also were bargains at the time, right? So just very quickly on the Eddie Nketiah one. Eddie Nketiah was going to leave on a free. We put Eddie Nketiah on 100 grand a week to make him stay. But I believe it was always with the view to selling him on, right? So 100K per week times what? How many weeks is there in the year? 52. Now, over the course of 5 years, it would have cost us 26 million pounds to keep a hold of Eddie Nketiah. Okay, over the course of 5 years, would have cost us way more to buy a sort of backup striker. It would have cost us more than 26 million quid. There was no transfer fee to get Eddie Nketiah in because we already had him at the club. His contract expired. We bring him on board, 26 million pound a year. 2 years into that deal, so if I divide the 26 million by 5, so 10 million pounds in, we then go and sell him for 30 plus million. So we made our money on Eddie Nketiah. We paid 2 years worth of salary. Was it 2? It might have even just been 1 year after he signed that contract. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But even if it was 2, we still made 20 odd million pounds profit on Eddie Nketiah, even with that contract. This is the thing, right? People look at salaries in isolation. Salaries, transfer fees, signing on fees, agent fees. All of these things make up the bigger picture of a transfer or a signing of a player. And people choose to ignore that. We made money on Eddie Nketiah. We didn't lose money on Eddie Nketiah. Why do people talk like we were just throwing £100,000 into a scrap heap every single week with Eddie Nketiah? That's not the truth. It's not the truth. We took a decision that we either go out and buy another forward, which we didn't. We chose to keep Eddie Nketiah. We can have a debate around whether that was the right decision or not. But we did that. We made money on him because we sold him for the right price, partly as a result of him being on that contract and still having 3-4 years to run on it. So sometimes you have to invest to then reap the rewards later on. And these are basic business concepts that for a lot of people just seem to go over the top of their heads. And I don't understand why. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there for today. I said we'd talk more about Real Madrid. We ended up getting into some other conversations, which were interesting enough. So not an issue. We will bring you a full comprehensive preview of that Real Madrid game. We'll be live again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. unless something major breaks. Keep an eye out on the channel for some YouTube shorts as well, where we'll be dropping clips from the podcast and various other bits and pieces. Show your support with those. Like them, subscribe if you haven't already, all the rest of it. And if you're listening on audio, please do leave us your reviews. We'll see you all very, very soon on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves. Up the Arsenal. Come on, let's go to Madrid and finish the job. Up the